In this section, we are going to work on the topic of the nuclear self, since the idea is that you learn to recognize and control your true state of self, that which is at the center of your being and whose main function is to balance all the forces that act on it, which, as you saw in the previous section, are what limit it and transform it into something that it is not. There is the explanation why you have never managed to be who you are. This is very similar to if you looked in a mirror and tried to discover your true self. Most likely, if we did this exercise on a psychic level, what you will observe is a very blurred portrait of yourself, because your self state is always transforming into someone you are not. And that is precisely what causes the greatest number of problems in the people who consult me. That by not recognizing who they really are, or knowingly refusing to accept themselves, they enter into processes of frustration and anger, and with this, depression or anxiety arises. Because the true self always wants to come to light, but if you do not let it, or the forces of your psyche pressure it to remain hidden, that situation is generated in which you feel that pressure, and with it the frustration of not being able to be who you are actually. So the question that arises is how to find the true state of self. To do this, the key is to discover the components of the core self-state. These are your desires, which are made up of two fundamental elements: who you really want to be and what you want to do in your life. Let's first look at the psychic component of who you want to be. If you look at it, it is a projection of your personality. There's a projection of who you want to be, of who you have always wanted to be, but that projection, throughout your life, has been atrophied due to the interactions you have had with other people or the traumatic experiences you have had in some passages of your life. For example, years ago I had the gaze of a person who instinctively, from his most tender years, wanted to be a writer. As a child, he really liked to read, and he always had in mind writing books. But what happens when he communicated his aspirations? I am talking about a 6-year-old boy. His relatives made fun of him. You notice how the true personality is truncated. And later, the father wanted that child to be an athlete, that he played football. So the boy forced himself to meet the expectations of others. But what happened? His self-state always struggled to get out. He couldn't help but want to write or read. But in the environment in which he lived, that was prohibited. At one point, this person couldn't stand it anymore and lost the meaning of his life. He no longer found meaning in doing tasks that meant nothing for him. In fact, he had forgotten who he was. When he came to my consultation, he did so because of depression and anxiety associated with a state of anger. When I asked him what caused him to feel that way, throughout the conversation, we realized that it was his true self state that was struggling to get out, which he refused because he had been taught that valuable people were only those who behaved like the normal, quote unquote, people in the environment in which he lived, and who had the common jobs that everyone had. So in your case, I want you to do the following exercise. I want you to think about exactly what you have always wanted, focusing on who you would really like to be. Not in that state of self that others impose on you, but in that projection of yourself that you have made since your earliest childhood. I want you to close your eyes and see yourself and think about how you see that projection of yourself. What kind of person is he? What do you like? What it looks like from a physical point of view? How he dresses? What read? What activities you do for fun? What activities give you pleasure? Through this exercise, you will notice that who you are today has nothing to do with who you really are. What the best version of yourself would be if that version were on Earth right now. I tell you this precisely because it is that best version of yourself who you really are. The problem is that it is you and your circumstances that have prevented you from being who you are, with which another problem arises that by not being who you are, you limit yourself from having the life you really want for yourself, which is precisely the second component of your nuclear self state. What do you really want to do? What has to do with your true life goals? What do you want to achieve? Or what you would like to do to feel fulfilled on an individual level, but also on a general level? That is what you would like to do to feel that you have contributed in some way to humanity. But it happens that in most cases, those life goals are truncated by what others tell you or by the experiences you have had. Sometimes life forces you to be someone you don't want or to have a job you don't like. But it happens that in that process of maintaining a certain type of life to survive, little by little, you begin to forget what you really want for your existence. An example could be that of a person who has always wanted to be an artist, to paint pictures, but who denies that possibility because he or she does not have the conditions for it. In fact, I had a case of this type. He was a person who had always wanted to paint, but in his family environment, the most important thing was to have a job and earn money. And that caused him a lot of frustration because since he was a child, he always wanted to be a painter because it was something that gave him a lot of pleasure. And he also had talent, but he didn't dare to do it. Now, it is not that someone who makes this change is going to achieve their goals overnight, but the fact of setting the goal puts you on the path to personal fulfillment. In this case, he discovered that he could work at the same time he could take painting courses. He told me that just studying painting allowed him to feel for the first time in his life as if he were breathing, precisely because he was satisfying that self state of his, which was the one that he had been atrophied for so many years. So, in your case, I want you to think with complete honesty what you would like to do with your life if all your problems were solved. What would you do to feel that you are a contribution to the world? And now, once you have recognized who you want to be and what you want to do, you are now in a position to know for sure who you really are. The key is that you can control the forces that limit you from being that best version of yourself, which is what we are going to work on in the following sections. I see you there.